Greetings, everyone. Welcome to SNAAP Chats Research in Focus. I'm Leanne Scotto Adams. I'm the Executive Director of SNAAP. I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Christian Folk, Dr. Joanna Veronkovich, and Dr. Angie Miller. We have a lot to share with you today. We're excited to welcome Dr. Richard Paulsen. And for those of you who haven't joined us before, this is second of our virtual discussion series called SNAAP Chats. And it's a series for those interested in the role and the impact of arts education and professional pathways of creative graduates. We will record today's session so you can view it later. We will leave plenty of time at the end for questions. We'll be addressing questions in the chat. Please be sure to put yourself on mute if you're not talking. And I'm going to hand this over to Christian Folk, who will introduce our speaker today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again, as Leanne said, for joining us. I am very excited to welcome Dr. Paulsen to chat with us today. Just a reminder, our previous Snapchat and all of our future Snapchats will be hosted on our website, the video recordings, and I'll put that link in the chat. I'll just introduce Dr. Paulsen and then we can get right into it. So, Dr. Richard Paulsen is an assistant professor of sport management in the University of Michigan School of Kinesiology. His research focuses on labor market issues in the entertainment industries with a focus on sports and the arts. He holds a PhD in economics from Northeastern University, and his research has been published in many peer-reviewed journals. So please welcome Dr. Paulsen to talk about the success of arts majors in entrepreneurship and innovation.
Thanks, Christian. Let me go ahead and share my slides, and I appreciate the introduction here. It'll save me a little bit of time because I've got an intro slide myself, and you've captured a lot of that information. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the paper that was featured in the most recent SNAAP data brief. I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about data sources on studying U.S. artists and arts graduates. Um, so again, a little bit of who am I, and I think Christian covered all of this, but yes, I'm an assistant professor in the sport management department at Michigan. My PhD is in economics from Northeastern. My primary field was labor, secondary field, and industrial organization. And broadly, I study labor market issues in the entertainment industries. And I do quite a bit of work on the sports industry and athletes, and I also do some work on artists and arts graduates. And before I was at Michigan, I was in an economics department. So I'm doing a little bit more sport research now than I had been before, but I do a mix of both. So I want to start by kind of overviewing some of the data sources that can be used to study artists and arts graduates in the United States. Um, Starting with SNAAP, and then I'm going to focus a little bit more on some other data sources. My own work primarily uses some of these other sources, and many of you are familiar with SNAAP, so I'll spend a little bit less time there. But starting with SNAAP, so SNAAP is the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. It's a survey that's administered every few years. It has a very detailed questionnaire targeted to alumni of arts programs in the US. All alumni of educational institutions that choose to participate in the survey are given the option to complete that survey. And again, you're likely familiar with SNAAP. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that, though I will spend some time talking about, what are kind of some strengths and weaknesses of SNAAP and these other data sources, and how can we think about using them all to study who we're interested in studying. Now, coming to a data source I'm a little bit more familiar with, and this is the data source that was used in the SNAAP data brief that came out this week, the American Community Survey. So the American Community Survey is a survey that's administered yearly, starting back in 2010 by the US Census Bureau. Now, starting in 2000 by the US Census Bureau. Prior to 2000, we had census data that came in every 10 years, going back as far as 1850. So you can identify artists in the US using census data as far back as 1850. Um, though the questionnaire has gotten far more detailed and now it's yearly. Now, the American Community Survey questionnaire it's administered to a 1% random cross-sectional sample of the US population. Um, so, it's not targeted toward artists. Everybody's filling out this survey, or, the 1% random sample that it's sent to, response rate is 90-95%, pretty high response rate. But again, it's not targeted toward artists, but there are questions related to things like education and work. So you can identify artists and arts graduates using this survey based on these employment and educational questions, right? And because it's, the US population, what, 330 million or something, a 1% random sample, you're looking at 3 million people a year. Even if the share of those people that are artists is relatively small, let's say 5%, that's still a pretty good number of artists included each year in the data. Um, Another data source that I've used in some of my work is the National Survey of College Graduates. This is a survey that's administered every few years, dating back as far as 1993. Starting in 2013, the survey was administered every other year. And I think the most recent version of the data is 2021, but there was a 2023 survey administered. I think they're in the process of doing a 2025. The National Survey of College Graduates is administered by the US Census Bureau and sponsored by the National Science Foundation. Now, this questionnaire is administered to a much smaller sample than the American Community Survey, looking at about 160,000 college graduates responding to each iteration. Now, the data is somewhat panel in nature. Some share of the respondents are new respondents, some share had completed the prior iteration. Now, because it is sponsored by the National Science Foundation, there is an oversampling of graduates from the STEM fields, but it does capture college graduates from all fields, right? So there are some arts graduates among the survey respondents to this questionnaire. And many of the questions are like those in the American Community Survey about topics like education and employment, though the education related questions are far more detailed in this questionnaire. And then one more data source that I'll spend, just a brief second talking about. I haven't used this in my own research, but it is one that can be used to study arts graduates potentially too, and that's the current population survey. This is administered monthly by the US Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a detailed questionnaire administered to a random sample of 60,000 US households. This is the survey that's used to calculate the monthly unemployment rate, for example, in the US. Now, this survey follows a 4-8-4 design. What that means is that respondents are in the sample for 4 consecutive months, then they're out of the sample for 8 months, and then they're back in the sample for another 4 months. So it is panel data. And like the ACS, it's not targeted toward artists specifically, but artists and arts graduates are among the survey respondents. So you can find some graduates in this sample. Now, spending some time talking about my work here. Um, Within my work on artists and arts graduates, I published several papers using the American Community Survey and the National Survey of College Graduates. So I've got some pretty strong familiarity with those data sources. I'm going to give a quick overview of my work, a little bit of detail on a handful of projects here, though I'm happy to talk about some of these in more detail if questions arise. And I'm going to then talk about kind of some of the strengths and weaknesses of the various data sources for answering these questions that we're interested in asking as arts researchers. So the first paper I'm going to touch on quickly here, health insurance access and the career choices of college graduates with majors in the arts. This was published last year in the Journal of Cultural Economics. Um, and what we look at in this paper, we try to understand how health insurance access is impacting whether or not college graduates with arts majors are choosing to pursue careers in the arts. Um, and we took advantage of kind of a natural experiment that took place when the Affordable Care Act passed. One of the provisions was the dependent coverage expansion, which then allowed young adults to stay on their parents' health insurance up to age 26. Previously, it was either 18 or 21. And what we found here is that, relative to young arts graduates that were over 26, like say 27 to 30, those just under 26 were a lot more likely to work in the arts following the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which suggests that, expansions of the social safety net uh, can allow arts graduates to, pursue jobs that they want in the arts rather than maybe potential other careers that might pay a little bit better. And kind of following some of that work, I've got a paper that came out also last year in Journal of Cultural Economics called Student Loan Debt and the Career Choices of College Graduates with Majors in the Arts. And kind of a similar idea here, this study uses National Survey of College Graduates data, and I'm looking to understand how student debt impacts whether or not arts majors are pursuing careers in the arts or careers closely related to their degree field. And kind of like the health insurance paper, I find that arts graduates with debt and those that have borrowed are significantly less likely to pursue careers in the arts. So again, kind of these barriers that are preventing our graduates from pursuing jobs that they maybe want in the arts, in favor of jobs that maybe pay a bit more to, meet their basic needs. Another paper here, and I bring this one up because it highlights maybe a weakness of some of the other data sources and some strengths of the SNAP data specifically here. Um, Here I've got a paper with Neil Alper and Greg Wassel called Assessing the Role of Sexual Orientation in the U.S. Labor Market for Artists and Arts Majors. And in this paper, we look to, kind of ask this question of, um, what does the demographic composition of our workforce look like? Um, and with a specific focus on sexual orientation. And we find that, probably not surprising, um, uh, persons from persons that are in same-sex relationships, and I use that language specifically because of limitations of the data, are overrepresented in the arts and among arts majors relative to other occupations and other major fields. And now coming into this question of entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, the SNAP data brief is based on this paper here, Agglomeration and Success of Arts Majors Working in Entrepreneurship and Innovation. That's largely a follow-up to this initial paper here published in Small Business Economics, again with Neil Alper and Greg Wassel, where we look to understand kind of how prevalent are arts majors in entrepreneurial occupations and innovative industries. And here we're defining entrepreneurial occupations as those that have a high share of self-employment. And innovative industries are defined based on these are industries that the US Patent and Copyright Office identifies as either being copyright intensive or patent intensive or potentially trademark intensive. And we focus on copyright specifically, though what we find here is that our arts graduates are, greatly overrepresented in these occupations or these roles that are entrepreneurial, and they're greatly overrepresented in these innovative industries. And we suggest that, the training uh, in the skill set that our graduates have has some, potentially transferable skills that make them highly employable in these areas. And then the follow-up study here, um, this agglomeration and the success of arts majors working in entrepreneurship and innovation. And again, I'd encourage you to take a look at that SNAP data brief for the original paper. Here we like to kind of understand, well, we know that arts graduates are more likely to be working in entrepreneurship and innovation relative to graduates of other fields, including STEM fields. Um, where are these arts majors doing this work? And, to what extent is where they're working impacting their success? And what we find here is that when arts majors are in pockets of the country where there are lots of other arts majors, they're a lot more likely to be working in these entrepreneurial occupations or innovative industries. And similarly, they're also more likely to be working in entrepreneurial occupations or innovative industries if they're around other entrepreneurial workers or other innovative workers. Um, So there's potentially some agglomeration effects, right? And this has, historical ties in the arts. We've seen, historically cities like London or Paris or New York, right, where you see these kind of pockets of artists, right? So we see these agglomeration effects. We also see that arts majors tend to do better or earn more when working in entrepreneurial roles when they're around lots of other artists, right? So potentially that's improving their success when they're around other maybe like-minded persons. So talking a little bit about some of the benefits of SNAP and these other data sources for answering these questions, and then I'll open up to Q&A. I know we're about halfway through our time here. Highlighting some benefits of using SNAP data. Now, I'm going to pick on a couple of big benefits here, but there are lots of good reasons to use SNAP data. One important benefit is the ability to design our own questions, right? We have very little influence over the questions that the American Community Survey or the National Survey of College Graduates or the Current Population Survey ask, right? But we're here in this room, right? We have some influence over the types of questions that are included on SNAP. Now, I highlighted one of my prior works that looked at sexual orientation among artists, right? We used ACS data, but I'll highlight here that the ACS does not ask about sexual orientation. It asks for sex. We know household composition. We can identify couples in same-sex relationships based on household composition and the reported sex of their respondent, right? Um, but SNAP does better, right? So if we want to ask these questions, there are potentially reasons to look at the ACS. It allows us to make comparisons to other industries and other occupations because it's not just artists, right? But the SNAP questionnaire actually asks, right, which best describes your current sexual orientation? And respondents can then self-identify as bisexual, gay, or lesbian, and there are some other choices too, right? So definitely one benefit of using SNAP data is that we can design these questions and we can do some things that are right with these questions that, the American Community Survey should have a question about sexual orientation, right? Um, I'll also highlight that the SNAP data has questions that are designed with arts graduates in mind. For example, one limitation of the American Community Survey data is that it does not allow respondents to report multiple jobs or employers, which can be a problem when studying artists because multiple job holding is super common, right? You're allowed to report one occupation, one industry. That should be the industry you work the most hours, but there are lots of artists that have several different jobs, several different occupations. The 2022 SNAP questionnaire um, has questions specific to multiple job holding, where you can report multiple arts occupations, for example, right? So again, definitely the SNAP questionnaire has the benefit of these questions are designed with arts graduates in mind, which is not the case for our other data sources. But highlighting some benefits of using the ACS or these other data sources. One benefit is random sampling. And I'll just say here, as a quantitative researcher, we can feel more confident that our findings are valid for the broader population we're interested in if our sample is random. There's also the benefit of the ability to make comparisons to non-arts graduates. And if we think about theories of artist behavior, like Throsby's work preference model, for example, right, it suggests that artist career choices may respond to things like student debt and health insurance uh, differently than other workers because arts graduates may be, more intrinsically motivated, or artists are more intrinsically motivated to pursue the arts, right? Um, Part of this may also be because compensation may not be as high as in some other industries, right? And one of the benefits of using some of these other data sources is that we can then make comparison between arts and non-arts graduates because the data sources have both, right? So if I want to look at how arts graduates respond to student debt, my paper says not only do arts graduates respond very strongly to student debt, but other graduates don't, right? An arts graduate might be more likely to take a non-arts job if they have significant levels of debt. There's no reason to think an engineering grad's going to take a non-engineering job if they have lots of debt. And I'll highlight here the samples include artists that are not arts graduates, so we may also want to study, right? And certainly some share of artists in the US have college degrees in the arts, but many don't, right? So we can also look at artists beyond just those with degrees in the arts. And I'm going to kind of end here with talking about some complementarities here. There are certainly benefits to each of these data sources. And as researchers, our findings are going to be stronger when we can replicate our findings using various data sources. And coming back to this question of student debt and arts graduates' career choices, I'm going to highlight a paper by Smith and Albana, which there's also a SNAP data brief written about, that uses SNAP data and finds that student debt decreases the likelihood that arts graduates work in the arts. My paper that I referenced previously uses National Survey of College Graduates data and finds the same things, right? And certainly these complementary findings strengthen the validity of both studies, while the differing strengths of the data sources allow both studies to make pretty unique contributions to our body of knowledge. All right, I did pretty good on time. I'm going to stop here and open it up to questions. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. So we'll start with there's one question in the chat. And Rebecca asked, what made you start researching art students coming from economics and sport management? Just curious how you got interested in this student population.
Sure. So I have no training in sport management. All of my training is in economics. My undergraduate degree is in math and economics, a master's and PhD in economics. So all my background in economics. Now, personally, I played the tuba growing up. Got friends that work in the arts. I also played sports growing up, so I had kind of these dual interests. Um, and in doing my dissertation work, some of that work was related to sports. Though one of my dissertation committee members was Neil Alper. I don't know if Neil's here today, but Neil was on Neil is here dissertation committee. Also did some work with Greg Wassel while I was in grad school. They brought me into some of this arts work. But certainly I have interest in both. I've been in the econ departments previously. Um, and I was doing there are a lot of complementarities between the arts and sports and thinking about this kind of broader entertainment industry. Uh, and there are a lot of kind of similarities between these workforces. So as a researcher, I think there are times when I borrow from the arts literature when thinking about my sports work. There are times when I borrow from the sports literature when thinking about my arts work.
Great, thank you. And then Angie asked in the chat, our Snap colleague, similarly, any interesting comparisons or common threads between sports and the arts?
Definitely this piece of intrinsic motivation of the workforce is a common thread. Um, and as it relates to the arts, we focus a lot on artists when it comes to that intrinsic motivation. When it comes to sports, certainly the athletes are intrinsically motivated, but I think some of the other workers in sports are also intrinsically motivated. Um, and that has implications for the two labor markets. We see just like in the arts, average compensation in sports is quite low, especially for non-athlete workers, but also for athletes. For every Shohei Ohtani making $70 million in baseball, there are thousands of minor league baseball players that are struggling to get by, right? So definitely they're both kind of like superstar industries of the labor markets. Um, but there are certainly other comparisons to, the way that we approach, creating the output is similar in a lot of ways. Yeah, there are definitely some comparisons. I think of the labor market ones, but there are other comparisons to make too, for sure. And now I'm seeing another question in the chat, which I'm happy to just read directly. So, how might we formalize the constructs of arts/slash non-arts majors, industries, etc.? So in doing research and understanding findings, we have widely accepted definitions of these. Yeah, so I mean that's a good question. When I've in my work and building off of Neil and Greg's work, when we think about defining arts occupations and arts majors, the National Endowment for the Arts has their definition of, who artists are, kind of what the industries look like. Um, So I often think about referencing that definition. I know there's also like the creative trident model, which thinks about arts employees as kind of you've got the artists themselves, you've got, supporting workers within arts industries, and you've got artists that are working kind of outside of the arts in other ways. There's also kind of the concentric circles model where you've got kind of more central arts industries and expanded ones. So definitely researchers have thought about these questions and defining these things. And that's always something I have to be very careful about in my research as I'm, deciding who should be included in my sample, who are artists, who are not. And I think with college graduates, we can pretty easily delineate what we think are kind of the core arts majors and what might other related majors be. But yeah, that's a great question.
And then our wonderful board president, Doug Dempster, has a question.
Thank you for that intro, Christian. Richard, thanks for this presentation and your research. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
I understand this study is looking at agglomeration, which is really interesting. And I was wandering around Mexico City a week ago, and I realized that all the little shops rebuilding transmissions were on the same block, and all the little shops selling, I don't know, umbrellas were on the same block. And, there's a collaboration in other industries that is really interesting, and I wonder what the connections are. But I'm most interested in a remark you make, or it's in your abstract, and you mention it in the data brief, about uh, art school, art and design, music school graduates finding their way into innovative businesses. Now, every art and music school dean that I've ever met has said to parents that, well, yes, we know that it's unlikely that your students will find their way onto the stage of the Metropolitan Opera, but students are learning a very transferable skill. Creativity is a transferable skill that has high value in other industries. And it wasn't so many years ago that what's his name was saying that the MFA is the new MBA. Every industry is looking to hire creativity. And so these are highly transferable skills, even if playing the oboe itself is not of high value in other industries. The creativity one learns as an oboist is what do the data show about those graduates in non-arts related innovative and entrepreneurial industry? So it's not surprising if we find a bunch of MFA graduates in the writers table in Hollywood. That wouldn't surprise any of us. But it would be really great for the whole industry of post-secondary arts education if we found a bunch of MFAs or music school graduates, master students, or DMAs doing coding for Google or Apple. Is that what the data are showing?
That's a good question. And I don't want to misrepresent the data in thinking about it's been a little bit since I've looked specifically at that data. Um, I will say that certainly among our entrepreneurial occupations, artists have high self-employment, they're there, right?
Right, right.
Um, but we have, yeah, I think there are 86 or 100 entrepreneurial occupations that kind of meet our threshold there.
Mhm.
And we found that artists are not only prevalent in high numbers in entrepreneurial occupations within the arts, right? But they're also pretty prevalent in entrepreneurial occupations and management roles and some of these other
Wow.
areas too,
Mhm.
right? So the data does suggest that they are these other places. But yeah, I'd have to dig a little bit deeper into it and refresh my memory to give you a great answer to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So those data are hugely relevant to art schools, which have been marketing themselves as teaching the transferable skills of creativity, entrepreneurship, which is not to say, yes, your child is going to become a freelance artist because that's the only way you can make a living as an artist. That's not a surprise to anyone, and everyone knows that's a tough road. But if we really are teaching disciplines that have a transferable skill that we call creativity or innovativeness or however you want to characterize it, that has huge relevance to the post-secondary arts education field. And I'm not asking you to do our SNAAP's job for us, but I'm going to ask Joanna to pursue this more deeply and see if we can't get at some of those data in the next SNAAP survey. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If I can follow up a little bit, Rick, do you mind if I
Go ahead.
intervene
Thanks,
as a
Neil.
dissertation advisor or one of your dissertation advisors? Doug, I think you and I talked, and I can't remember whether this was before or after we did this work on double majoring and the importance of a double major on arts majors income. And I can't remember the reference for it, Rick. I can't remember where we did that. But certainly that's one way of getting that particular question. And I can't, Joanna, I think you did some work on double majors as well, if I'm not mistaken. But if I'm wrong, I apologize. But
Yeah, Neil, you had a 2018 NEA report, I think.
right,
Is that right? Yeah.
yeah, I think that's where it is. If not, it was a paper we presented somewhere and never did get it out there to be published. But I mean, that's one way to try to track that. And if SNAAP has that data, you might want to look at it to see for those people who had more than one major, what were they and what significance they had. And if I recall, some of the results there's no question that arts majors are successful in conjunction with their other majors, are successful in non-arts occupations with some advantage. Not necessarily very large, but I think there were some significant advantages depending on what that other major was. Sorry for interrupting.
No, thanks, Neil. I appreciate it. I do see some other questions here in the chat.
Yeah.
Christian, you want to take a few of these? I know we're slightly over, but I'm happy to
Yeah,
take those along.
we are at time, but I'm hoping I can put Joanna on the spot just to kind of verbalize what she just put in the chat to close us out about our new data collection efforts and plans for the 2027 survey.
Sure. So yes, please do read my chat message, but the question came from Barbara about how we're watching the trends of our alumni given all of the changes and cuts to education funding, et cetera. And so I did want to mention that we've just launched SNAAP Pulse, which is a panel data collection effort. Which means that we will now be more frequently collecting data from individuals who graduated from arts and design alumni program, as opposed to every 5 years when we partner with institutions in the large SNAAP survey. We're of course still doing that very important survey launching in 2027, but now in the meantime, we will have much more timely data on various topics of urgency. So definitely cuts to education funding are those topics of urgency, and we're right now planning for Pulse and all of the topics that we'll be administering throughout the next couple of years. So great question, and if you have more questions about that, please do get in contact with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joanna. We are at time. I know, Dr. Paulsen, you had your email in the chat. If you have additional questions, can I invite folks to reach out to you directly about your research? Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just drop me an email there in the chat. Yeah, people can certainly send questions my way. Happy. Yep.
Excellent, thank you. And we'll be sending out the invitation and information about the next SNAAP Chat, I think happening next month, August?
In August, yeah.
Excellent. And we recorded this session, so we'll share it out. Thanks so much to everyone for attending today, for all of your questions. Thanks to Dr. Paulsen And have a great rest of your hopefully sunny July afternoon.